kembali lagi bersama aku, Sally, narator dari Serabi. Kali ini aku berkesempatan untuk mengunjungi New Orleans bersama saudara aku, Audrey, dari tanggal 24 sampai 28 November. Nah, kebetulan tanggal 24 November ini adalah hari Thanksgiving yang merupakan perayaan besar di US. Jadi kalau bisa dilihat jalanannya kosong dan banyak restoran dan toko-toko yang tutup. Tapi stay tune terus untuk mengikuti keseruan kita hari pertama.
Videonya.
Nah, videonya. Semuanya. Di mana Tepatnya di dalam tram.
Di downtown.
Di dalam tram. Gitu, OTW ke Frenchman Street. Right.
Oke, kita langsung aja cobain Cafe du Monde yang udah berdiri sejak 1862 di New Orleans. Cafe ini buka 24 jam setiap harinya. Dan kenapa cafe ini bisa terkenal banget? Karena mereka jual beignet, yaitu semacam donat, dan coffee and chicory, yaitu semacam tanaman herbal gitu deh. So, let's check it out.
Okay, this is the beignet. Try. Gila semua gula sih. Kayak donat gak sih? Ada. Nyam. Enak. Isinya apa sih? Gak ada isinya. Ya, kayak donat gitu gak sih?
Donat. Covered in sugar. A lot of sugar.
Mantap. With chocolate and coffee.
Oke, jadi di hari pertama ini kita sebenarnya nggak begitu banyak aktivitas sih. Karena memang kita nyampenya udah sore, jadi tadi setelah dari Cafe du Monde, kita langsung ke titik pertemuan untuk ghost tour. Ya, seperti namanya, kita akan mendengarkan cerita-cerita horor, mistis, dan kejam dari peristiwa-peristiwa yang telah terjadi di New Orleans di masa lalu. Kita akan berpindah-pindah lokasi dengan jalan kaki dan tanpa menggunakan transportasi apapun. So, buat kalian yang suka cerita horor, this is for you.
My name's Richie. I'll be taking you guys around today. I gotta go over a couple of just basic boring rules first. One of the most popular in New Orleans is this lovely square behind me. Ooh. So we're in Jackson Square. Since this was in the center, everything used to happen here. So, that big church up front, it's never been in a different spot. So you had weddings in the square, you had fruit vendors, you had coffee stands, you also occasionally had a beheading or two. All public executions until about 1850s happened right here behind this gate, okay? Kind of where you see the large statue that's lit up in the center. That was like the big execution. Anybody in this group, you guys know anything about voodoo? Ever done any research? Know anybody that does? Often considered a religion. Okay, it comes from West Africa. It was brought here during the transatlantic slave trade. So in voodoo, they believe in one god. That god's kind of hands-off. You don't talk to God directly. You talk to the Loa spirits, which are the spirits of voodoo. And at least in New Orleans, a lot of voodoo practitioners will serve the Loa spirits and also pray to the saints all at the same time.
Di tengah-tengah tour kita ada break sekitar 15 menit dan kebetulan kita dikasih kesempatan untuk mengunjungi salah satu bar tertua di US yang bernama Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop yang dibangun tahun 1722 sampai 1732. Nah, kenapa terkenal banget? Karena memang mereka punya minuman yang super enak, namanya daiquiris. Ya, itu semacam smoothie tapi ada alkoholnya. Pokoknya super enak. Kita lanjut ghost tour-nya ke Lollery Mansion.
1,500 different versions. If you come here with a different ghost tour every single night, you're gonna get a slightly different version of what sick, twisted stuff this lady was doing in her torture chamber, okay? Her name was Delphine Lalaurie. She was crazy. All right, now, she's the equivalent of a millionaire, and her daughter married the son of the governor, so, like, she's connected. People had noticed that she had an unusual amount of enslaved people for a city home, and that it was kind of like a revolving door. She would buy people, they would disappear. It got to the point that other people in town didn't want to sell her enslaved people, and you have to understand that the aristocratic slave-owning class of New Orleans back then, all of them were like serial killer-esque, okay? They had no morals, they were all assholes, and when they don't want to do business with you, that means something. But what blows the whole case open is there's a fire. All right, so it's April 11th, 1834. You can find newspapers from this day. Delphine has some friends inside here. They're having some drinks, and the fire starts in the back portion here, kind of where the garage door is today. Yeah, that's still the house. Everything from the garage door to the corner is the house. All right, so there's a kitchen fire. Delphine takes her friends outside. They're not really all that worried. It's a small fire. What gets weird is when the fire brigade shows up to put the fire out. They try to get into this little building back here, and they can't get into it because it's locked. All right, and so they go to Louis Lalaurie, because he's the man of the house, and they're like, hey, dude, give us the keys. And Louis tells them off. He tells them to mind their own damn business, and he walks off down the street. And they're watching him go like, dude, your house is on fire. What are you doing? And Delphine won't give him the keys either. And so finally, a couple of her neighbors are gathering because the fire's getting bigger and they don't want town to burn down. And so one of her neighbors tells the firefighters, listen, just go break the damn door in, all right? Get the fire out. And so they do this. They break into the back building. They get the fire in the kitchen out. They go to secure the rest of that building just to make sure the fire's good and out. And they find multiple rooms of torture chamber. All right? First door they open, there's a woman, she's tied to the bed, she's starved half to death. She claims she started the fire. She had gotten a hold of a couple pieces of paper and had made like some little sticks rubbed together, and the fire had traveled down the wall into the kitchen, and that's where it had ignited, you know, gotten a little bit bigger. And she did that because she wanted to die, all right? She'd been held in this room for months. Mind you, there are corpses in this room too of people who have already died. There's another woman who's chained to the wall, and there's still another room with more torture victims in it. All right? So you have about 7 survivors that were pulled from these rooms. You get a few details from the newspapers as to the kind of torture she was doing. We know chains, cages, there was a lot of shackles used. One guy had an iron collar around his neck with spikes so that he couldn't move his neck at all. One of the firefighters talks about how they had gotten a hold of a woman and were trying to help her, you know, to get out of the building. And they noticed that she had cuts kind of on her arms and her torso, and the cuts were wiggling. And when they got her outside in a better light, they realized they were seeing maggots moving in the cuts. So that gives you an idea. Now, the reason why you'll get a different story from every single tour guide that brings you here is because the newspapers pulled the following. After giving you those details, they say, hey, everyone was maimed horribly. We're going to spare you the rest of the details. And so people made up details, all kinds of details. Some of them are true, some of them are not, some of them we can't tell. We do know that the survivors were taken from this building here to Jackson Square, where we started. And they were unfortunately put on display there. And the reason they did that is they didn't think people would believe them. All right, the firefighters literally thought, no one's going to believe us if we tell them what we found in this chamber. Let's go put the evidence right in the middle of town. And I say it kind of vague like that. They never named these people. We're not even given accurate counts. Everyone was enslaved to Delphine, and unfortunately enslaved people in that day were not treated as human beings, even if they were tortured like that. So you're like, oh dear God. The thought is she murdered at least 17 people in these chambers, probably more. It's just kind of hard to tell from the actual evidence we have. And that gives you enough. Oh God. Anyway, so a mob forms, as you might imagine. Word spreads through town. About 300 guys come out here. They have pitchforks, they have torches. They demand Delphine come outside and pay justice. They want to string her up and set her on fire. Now, she does the one thing no one expects. She comes outside. Her carriage is waiting. The only reason the mob does not dive bomb her immediately is she is holding the hand of her 8-year-old son. And so unfortunately the mob hesitates because they're like, a kid. And she gets in the carriage and takes off that way, and no one ever sees or hears from her again. Alright, at least not in New Orleans. Since the mob can't kill her, they come back here, they destroy the house pretty much. Alright, everything that's in here is thrown into the street, smashed to pieces. They say the only thing that's original on this house is some of the archway supports on the first floor from the original home. Everything else is either burned, broken, or destroyed that day from the mob. Okay, for about a decade, no one lives in it, but then somebody gets a hold of it, they fix it up, they turn it into apartments. It's apartments for a couple of years, 3 people die, 1 guy jumps out of a window, and you're like, oh, and I will call your attention to, you notice the very top floor and how there's a window, and then there's a window that's plastered over. Sometimes they do that in New Orleans because somebody's jumped to their death from that window. Some people think, even though Delphine didn't die in this house, that her spirit's in here and that she's the malicious ghost. They talk a lot about there is at least a ghost starting in the 1920s that is throwing people downstairs, knocking them into walls, doing all kinds of crazy things. And so they think maybe that's her. As well as there's been sightings of other ghosts, possibly the people she tortured to death. The other thing about it is things go bankrupt in here a lot. And so Nicolas Cage bought it in 2007, and look at that, he committed bankruptcy in 2010. So you had asked, where did Delphine go? In real life, she went to Paris, that's where her husband's family was from. She lived there for about 15 more years, and she just died of natural causes. Now, the reason her ghost is back here, though, is she still had a son that was in New Orleans, and that guy wanted Mama home so badly, he had her body dug up, put on a boat, and shipped across the ocean. And she's buried in St. Louis No. 1 in the Blanc family tomb.
Dan hari pertama selesai. Setelah ghost tour, kita langsung pulang ke rumah karena hari udah malam. Lihat deh sampai berkabut gini. So, we'll see you on another video. Bye-bye!